Good afternoon, everybody. Please take your seats and we'll get this program started. Welcome to the 129th meeting of the George Washington Club. It's the oldest in the country. This is a tradition that could only be from the village and township of Holly. I thank you all for keeping this tradition alive. We have a good meal planned for you all. I turned 67 this year, and George Washington only lived to 67. But he accomplished so much in his time on this earth. He's the father of our country, and so we honor his contributions to our way of life. Presenting the colors is going to be the Holly Honor Guard by Mike Patterson. Please honor the flag. Now we'd like to thank First Baptist of Holly for letting us use this facility. They just put a new roof on this gymnasium, and they're working up some money to paint the place. And they're always been great in the community and doing things for the whole community, and we sure appreciate it. So now I'm going to introduce Phil Martin. Pastor Phil Martin is going to come in and do the invocation.
This is Katie. It's a privilege to have you guys here. I'm the pastor of the church here, and actually the roof is coming this summer. So as soon as the roof is on, we're going to paint the place, and we hope to have you all back next year, and it'll look practically new. Would you pray with me as we get ready to share a meal? Let's pray. Father in heaven, Lord, you have blessed us with great leaders, and we ask that you would do it again. We pray that you would humble us before you, that we would be a people that knows what's right and wrong and are proud to do what's right. We ask that you'd bless us as we gather and remember a great leader from the past, and bless this time, that we would be an encouragement to each other and inspired to imitate good leadership. And I ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
And now the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And please remain standing for our national anthem sung by Lindsay Tibbs from Holly High School.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets regular, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave
That's our Holly High School people. That's what we got in Holly, our beautiful. Now, I believe our lunch is ready. Okay, folks, I hope you enjoyed your meal. That was pretty good as far as I was concerned. There are a lot of people working hard to make sure that it happened today. Next up is Joe Mishler. Joe was a longtime resident and civic leader in our community. He's a retired teacher at Holly Schools, theater director, veterans support liaison at the Holly Veterans Resource Center, and founder. Joe's true passion is theater and the care of our veterans. Joe is also a Purple Heart recipient and is responsible for the Holly being a Purple Heart village and bringing the Vietnam Wall to this small village. Joe would like to update you on the progress of the Veterans Resource Center that he is a part founder of. Thank you, Joe.
Good afternoon. We are, the village of Holly is a Purple Heart village. And really, I'm not going to talk about the Veterans Center, I'm going to talk about Purple Hearts. We became a Purple Heart village a number of years ago, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And it was through the efforts of the VFW and Sam Alvarado and Art Ingram. They are responsible for writing up the paperwork, getting it submitted, getting Holly to be a Purple Heart village. Now, if you're wondering what that means, if you know of any veterans or you see a veteran, I will pass this around, and I better get it back. This is a Purple Heart. It is awarded to anyone wounded in action. And at the time of the Purple Heart Monument, it was estimated that there were probably somewhere between 150 and 250 residents of the school district who had been wounded in action. And that included men and women, especially in the forever wars that we've just gone through. So I'm going to pass this around. You can look at it. Now, this medal was created in 1932 by President Roosevelt to recognize all those wounded people. It was made retroactive to World War I, so anyone who was wounded in World War I was awarded this medal. Now, if you're wounded in action, and it's documented that you were wounded in action, then you will be awarded the medal. If you are killed in action, you are awarded the medal posthumously. So it's important to realize that being a Purple Heart village, we recognize the service of those people and we recognize the sacrifice. Because it's not always easy to be a wounded veteran. We see a lot of them come through the Veterans Center. They need help, they need hospital, they need doctors, they need financial assistance, they need all kinds of help. And at the Veterans Center, that's what we do. We try to help those people. But in the bigger picture, if you go downtown to where the Township Hall is, you will see the Purple Heart Monument. And it has on the monument a picture of George Washington that's on the medal. And that monument is there to honor all of those soldiers and service people. And when I say soldiers, I mean everybody, Marines, Air Force. I don't know if anybody's ever been wounded in the Space Force, but that's what it means. And I know that in both the VFW and American Legion, there are a number of people who were wounded in action. It's not always an easy thing. And sometimes you'll hear people say, well, you were wounded in action. You were a bullet magnet. That might sound funny. And it probably is funny, but it isn't funny. I myself was not a bullet magnet. I was a shrapnel magnet. Things exploded around me, and the pieces hit me. So that helps explain. There's quite a bit of difference between how people view that sort of thing. But that's why we're a village of Holly, Purple Heart Village. And I know there's a move to make the county a Purple Heart County. I don't know how far they've gotten with it. I don't have much to do with that. But whenever you see that, know that somebody went in the service, and not only did they serve, but they sacrificed. They shed their blood. And when you go downtown and you see the monument, take a look at the monument, read what it says. There's an identical monument out at Great Lakes National Cemetery where they have all the monuments. So, and anytime when you see a service person and they have all their ribbons and stuff, if you see the ribbon that's purple and white, that means they were wounded in action. When you see the ribbon and it's got a cluster in the middle of it, it's got one cluster, they were wounded twice. They got a couple, that means they were wounded 3 times. They got the original medal, then they got a second one. I have 2, so I have a Purple Heart with a cluster. And it's easy to happen in combat, trust me. Because all kinds of things happen. But that's how we became a Purple Heart Village. And this goes back to George Washington, who presented, I believe, 3 merit awards. And they were hearts. There's a display case back there that shows a replica of one of those hearts that were awarded. They were purple and white, and they were awarded to people. Basically, I believe they were awarded to people who were guards for George Washington. But he's the one who sort of started the medal thing. And the Purple Heart is, if you look at the row of medals, you got the Medal of Honors, the Distinguished Service Cross medals, the Silver Star, the Bronze Star, the Purple Heart. So, now you know. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. And in case any veterans need any help, you know, the resource center's right there in the center of town, right on Saginaw. All right, now for our featured speaker. Our featured speaker is Carol Egbo. And Carol has quite a history. Well, she likes talking about history, and she has quite a history herself. She's quite accomplished. Carol is an award-winning historian, researcher, and educator, and a strong advocate for the preservation of local history. She is also a historian and archaeology consultant to Oakland County Parks, co-chair of the Oakland County Cemetery Coalition, and the History Coalition of Oakland County. Back in the day, Michigan was a strategic piece of land fought over by the French, English, and the Native Indians, and has a rich history. And Carol is going to be speaking about that history here in Michigan, which is quite interesting. Carol is also a consultant for the Michigan Memories Digital Library Project and a master storyteller. We're honored to have her with us today. Let's give a hand for Carol.
Well, thank you for the invitation today. I'm a huge admirer of your group. Anybody that can be around this talk this long. I followed the Washington clubs historically in the 1800s in Oakland County, and they're all gone, but you guys are still here. So I was asked to give you a glimpse of Michigan during the American Revolution, but to do it in 20 minutes. I don't think historians are capable of that, but I have worked on it to get it down. Now, here's one thing. I have spinal stenosis, so I'm good for standing for about 4 or 5 minutes, and then I'm in trouble. And you don't need to look at me. You need to look up there. So I'm just going to sit and get comfy. And then I'm going to think about the fact that they have stuffed you filled with scalloped potatoes and ham, and then now talk about some history. So I'm going to try and make this as painless as I can. All right? Different perhaps from your high school class. So one problem I had, when I teach history, I like you to see history. I'm a historian for Oakland County, so I have these cool photos. The Shoemaker Foundation out at Addison Oaks, the old foundation of their homestead. I got a photo of that. My problem is this time period, I have no photos. But what I do have are maps. It occurred to me that I could tell the story today of this time period with maps. And then while I was doing that, I discovered something about George Washington that I didn't know. I learned that George Washington was a huge collector of maps. Not only a collector, but he utilized maps throughout his life. He collected over 40 highly significant maps that are now at Yale University. And recently, a historian took those maps, like this one. This is the inhabited part of Virginia. You probably had this in your textbook in high school. George Washington owned this map. It's at Yale now. Here's a cool map. This is one George Washington designed himself in 1754 when he was sent into the frontier. The frontier then was just south of Lake Erie. And went in and drew this map and kept it all those times. Now, a historian recently took those maps, come on, and he wrote a book about George Washington, a biography. Do you know there are 900 biographies of George Washington? For a historian to come up with a new angle on that, I was very impressed with. So what he did, he took George Washington's maps, put them in order, and he tells George Washington's story through maps. So I thought, well, I can do the same thing today. That book is at Amazon. It's about $50, but I know I plan on ordering it. And those of you who are Washington historians are probably going to want to do that. So I'm going to start with this map. This is the Great Lakes region. Up there in the right corner, that's the title of the map. If you have trouble reading it, it's because it's in French. The map says that it's northern Louisiana. Yes, at that time, the Great Lakes was part of the New France, which was called Louisiana. And why? Well, because technically it belonged to Louis XIV, the King of France at that time. So this map was reminding people of that and showing what they knew about the Great Lakes then. Now, I will tell you, there's another group of people who would have said, that is the wrong title for that map. What it should say is Anishinaabe, the land of the Anishinaabe. Because that had, for thousands of years, been the home of the Anishinaabe Native Americans. Now, who were they? Well, the Anishinaabe belonged to a larger group of Native Americans who shared a similar language, the Algonquin language. So at the time, as Europeans began to explore the area, you can see the Algonquin speakers spread across north of North America. Now, some ones you may be familiar with who were related to our Anishinaabe in Michigan. The Powhatan. Remember Jamestown? It'll be the Powhatan that saved the people of Jamestown. The Wampanoag. The Pilgrims met the Wampanoag. It was Wampanoag country when they landed. And then we have people like the Cheyenne and the Shawnee. They're all culturally related. Now, once the Anishinaabe began to develop in Michigan, they divided up into three related groups. We have the Odawa, that the British called the Ottawa, and then we have the Potawatomi and the Ojibwe. The Ojibwe were called the Chippewa by the British. Now, to think about what that meant, how they were related, they say, we are nations whose languages are similar, whose cultures are close, and whose lands are often shared, which is why they're also known as the Three Fires Confederacy. So, Anishinaabe-Aki, the Great Lakes region. Now, they crisscross the region with a series of trails. A lot of those are roads now. Dixie Highway happens to be the Saginaw Trail. The Grand River Trail, the Grand River Road. They also traveled by canoe. They were excellent canoeists, and some of their canoes could hold 20, 24 people. They were hunters and fishers, particularly lake sturgeon, and they grew crops where they had enough frost-free days, corn, beans, and squash, and they harvested wild rice. Of course, things were changed for them, because a guy named Christopher Columbus said, I think I'm going to go westward to get to China. And you see that little white line, that was his plan. But he ran into something. Two big continents. It turned out to be that his ideas about the world were quite incorrect. And of course, that will change everything. It will bring in a lot of explorers, in particular in our area, the French. You should remember some of these explorers from history. We have Champlain and Cartier and Boulet and Nicolet and LaSalle. And each of them kept coming a little further into the Great Lakes. And then what will happen? We'll get our first non-indigenous settlements. Native Americans had settlements here, but we'll get the first one at Sault Ste. Marie in 1668. It'll start as a Catholic mission and then become a trading post. And then, just 3 years later, St. Ignacio, which became St. Ignace in 1671. Again, a mission and a trading post. Now, what were they trading? What was the trade good here? Well, you probably remember it was beaver. It was beaver pelts. Beaver pelts had become a status symbol in Europe. And why? Hats. It was beaver hats. If you wanted to show how rich and important you wore a beaver hat. Now, there were beaver in Europe, but by then they had wiped them all out because these hats were so in demand. And so what will happen? History will change for indigenous people because of hats. And explorers will come in and begin more trading, which will lead to the Beaver Wars. Now, this is not beavers fighting beavers, all right? That wasn't about. It was about Native Americans, sadly, fighting Native Americans. What had happened in this area was that right where that circle is was the land of the Iroquois. The Iroquois were another linguistic group, and 5 of the Iroquois nations had formed a confederacy, just like the Anishinaabe had. They formed a group together. And they were trading with the Dutch and the English in the fur trade. And the English said, you know what, you don't have a lot of territory. We want you to get more furs. You need to get more territory. So we're going to give you weapons, and we're going to let you move to the west and take on the Algonquin speakers, the Anishinaabe. And that's what happened, armed by the Dutch and the British. You can see that right here, all those red arrows were incursions of the Iroquois into Michigan. And what would happen is what's happening to the Anishinaabe? They're being pushed out into places like Wisconsin, sometimes in northern Ontario, and that will change everything for them. So by 1670, look at the expansion of the Iroquois nations. But notice what it says in the lower peninsula, unoccupied. The Anishinaabe had literally been pushed out. Now they'll come back, as you see in a minute, but there's a time in our history where literally there's no one in the lower peninsula because of the Beaver Wars. Well, now what happens next? After this time period, the French will begin a fort building phase. They begin to worry about the British. They've armed the Iroquois, and now they say, what if the British start coming in and messing with the trade we have going on with the Anishinaabe. The first fort they will build will be down here, 1670 at Fort Miami, on the Miami River. Later that will become the St. Joseph River, named for not the place in Florida, but the Miami Native Americans who were Algonquin speakers, who were in Illinois and that part of Michigan. Now, it was LaSalle, the explorer, who builds the fort. He will build it, and then he'll leave and go off exploring for a year. And when he comes back, he notices that the fort has been burned down. So what does he do? He said, I'll build another fort. So he builds another fort in the same area. And then he leaves, and LaSalle never returns. So without him there, and without any troops there, any French troops, it literally falls apart. And so by 1689, it's literally gone. Now today, there's a historical marker there, so you can see where the fort was. Next in line will be Fort St. Joseph. And that was built right here. If you recognize that bridge, that's the Blue Water Bridge. This fort was built where Port Huron will develop later on. And then came, right up here, Fort Duval, which was at St. Ignace. They decided, no, to protect the fur trading post here, we're going to build a fort. By then, notice St. Ignace had grown. There was the village itself, which was made up of a French village of about 12 houses. There was a Huron Native American village. They were Iroquois speakers. There was an Odawa village, and there was the mission itself. And then we have Fort St. Joseph, which was just downriver from where Fort Miami had been built. Now that fort is a great big rock where that fort was. Here's something cool. They've been doing archaeology for some years at Fort St. Joseph. There's a new book out, it's at Amazon, about the fort and the fur trade and the archaeology going on there. And then we'll get Fort Pontchartrain, which is also known as Fort Detroit. Cadillac will build that in 1701. It'll be right on the riverfront. It'll be there for a while, and then by the time the revolution has broken out, it'll be decided that they need a bigger fort and further off the river. So Fort Lerneau will be built at that time. It'll become Fort Shelby, which it's known as, and the same fort, different name in the War of 1812. Now, just like some of the other forts, there's archaeology that's been going on there. That's been over since the 1960s. But if you look closely, they've uncovered something in the dirt. It turned out to be the flagpole. Imagine the flagpole of wood was still there by the 1960s. You can see that flagpole if you go down to the Detroit Historical Museum. And then we'll get Fort Michilimackinac or Fort Michilimackinac, depending on which historian you talk to. 715, right in what today's Mackinac City. And we know there's a replica fort there. That fort, you'll find out what happened to it in a minute. There's a replica fort. Archaeology has been going on there for over 60 years. It's the longest running archaeological excavation in the entire country. It's been continually. I had the good fortune for 2 summers, about 10 years ago, to take teachers up to dig at Fort Mackinac, 2 different summers. And then we'll get a fort, and I hate pronouncing this one, so I'm not going to embarrass myself with my very poor French. But Terry was at Sault Ste. Marie. Now, it had been surprisingly the mission and the trading post, and it didn't get a fort for a while. But it will then. It was a small fort. We have anything left but what a historian thinks it looked like. Well, now by 1760, indigenous people had moved back in. Well, where were they located? The Upper Peninsula was primarily Ojibwe. Over on the west side of the state, the Odawa. On the east side of the state, the Mississauga Ojibwe. They were just a subcategory of the people in the Upper Peninsula. And the Potawatomi down in the south. Now we'll have another conflict, the French and Indian War, which, if you remember, was the French not fighting the Indians or the Native Americans, but the British. But why did it get named that? It's because Native Americans chose to back the French. The experiences of the Anishinaabe with the British were different than the French. The French came in and said, you know, if we're going to communicate, we're going to learn Anishinaabe, your language. And many French traders married Ojibwe and Odawa women. And the French turned out to be people who said, you know, we're going to try and trade fairly. The British were different. The British said, you know what, that's a weird language. We want to learn that language. And so there was a lot of tension between the British and Native Americans. So the Native Americans will side with the French, and then this war will break out between them and the British. It will also be over an area of land, not just furs. That area of land was the Ohio Valley. The French claimed it. Oh yeah, whoops, got one more. The French had claimed it, and then you can see what happened. Some British colonists had started moving in and had left the eastern coast and gone into this rich river valley. So now there was tension between the French, who thought they owned it, the British, who wanted to own it, but who got left out? The Native Americans, who actually had owned it for thousands of years. But there'll be a huge conflict. And somebody, historians say, got it started. They started the French and Indian War. And they described him like this. He was a raw and ambitious 21-year-old when he was first sent to the Ohio Valley to confront the growing French presence in the region. His actions sparked the French and Indian War. Now, who was that? George Washington. Most historians say it was George Washington who got it started. That's another whole story. Fort Duquesne and Fort Necessity. But he actually, this young officer, is the one who said, really got it going. Well, that war will end, and there'll be another change in land. All the land that French had controlled will go to the British. All right? They will succeed. And now we'll have British in the area. Look at the large amount of land Britain now controls. And that's when an Odawa chief, by the name of Pontiac, said, enough is enough. You people have fought over land that rightfully belongs to us. You people have caused chaos in the area. And the British, we're worried you're going to keep stepping further into our lands. So Pontiac called a council of many different tribal nations who'd never really teamed together on anything before. But because of his mastery at bringing people together, they said, you know, there's only one way we're going to be able to push back against the British working together. And under Pontiac's leadership, Native Americans were able to take, capture, or destroy 8 of the 11 forts on the frontier. It was a huge achievement against the British. Now, of course, they will end up having to give up some of that land again. But it shows that at that time, Native Americans had said, we've got to stop people taking our land. And now what we'll find is the war will continue. Native Americans will still be a threat out in the Ohio Valley. So in steps this guy, King George, and he said, I am tired of having to send my soldiers out to the Ohio Valley to take care of you settlers. You guys have to go back over the Appalachian Mountains. Go back. I don't want you settling here. And anybody who's living on the East Coast, stay there. Stay east of the Appalachian Mountains. I don't want you going there, because I just have to protect you there. And I got enough to do with you people causing troubles all the time. So what he did, he made a proclamation, wrote it out, and said, see that line? Don't go over it. I don't want you going over. If you're already there, go back. How do you think the colonists felt about that? These were people who were beginning to feel a little independent. And they said, you know, we're not happy about you telling us where we can go and can't go. And so there were a lot of protests. There were also land issues. If you notice here, Virginia had already claimed the Ohio Valley. Connecticut had claimed a chunk of southern Michigan. Massachusetts had claimed another chunk of Michigan. They'd already claimed land. Some of them had bought land there. George Washington owned several acres in the Ohio Valley. And so there was a lot of tension. People saying, we're not happy with this king. And so that little thing will step up and it will lead to more protests and stand back. All the things that you studied in American history. That will start with that proclamation, and then, of course, Lexington Concord, and the revolution will start. Now, if you see, all the battles of the American Revolution were far to the east of Michigan, but Michigan did get involved. Right up here at Fort Michilimackinac, the British commander said, I would like to help out. I'm stuck way up here in the north. Washington is way out there. How can I get involved? So what he did, he armed 1,000 Odawa and Ojibwe warriors, and he sent them on a northern route all the way to Montreal. And they helped the British take back Montreal from the Americans that they had recently lost. And then several of them traveled with Burgoyne in 77 towards the south and were part of the journey when Burgoyne heads to come into the colonies from the northern. Now at that time, most of them became disenchanted with the British and weren't sure what was going to happen, and they ended up going home, and from that time were more neutral during the war. We also had, in 1777 at Fort Detroit, the commander there said, I want to create a diversion. I want to create something out in the west that will draw attention out here and maybe take some pressure off the British soldiers who are fighting in the east. So he sent a group of warriors down here into what will become Indiana and Fort Vincennes. And they create some havoc down in that area. And there's no American soldiers there. There's only militia. People who were called the Kentucky militia. Kentucky wasn't anything yet, not even a colony, but it was called Kentucky. And this guy was leading the Kentucky militia, Daniel Boone. They arrested Daniel Boone. They made him a prisoner, the British soldiers, and took him up and put him in Fort Detroit. I had no idea that Daniel Boone had been a prisoner in Fort Detroit, but he was there for a while. And then, come on, here we go. 1778, right here, the Americans will decide maybe it's time to attack Fort Detroit. You know, they seem to be causing a lot of troubles. So what they did, they built a fort right there in that part of Ohio called Fort Lorenz. And the intent was, we'll put a bunch of American soldiers there and they will attack Fort Detroit and take over Fort Detroit. And then we'll have an area of American soldiers up here in what will become Michigan. Well, it ended up that Washington, hearing the plan, said, you know what, not a good idea. I need you guys back out here in the east. So it never happened, but there was an attempt during the Revolution to take Fort Detroit. Now, because of that, the British began to fear that the Americans were actually going to make an attempt to move north, into what would become Michigan. So in 1780, they looked at Fort Michilimackinac and said, you know what? This is going to be hard to defend. Not only that, it's wood and it's not in good shape, we're moving the fort. And they moved the fort to Mackinac Island at that time. And they built a fort of limestone. Easier to defend and a stronger fort. Now I promised you a raid by the Spanish. I put that in my title. How did the Spanish get involved in Michigan during the Revolution? Well, the Spanish took the side of the Americans during the Revolution. And they decided maybe it was time to hassle the British a bit. So they sent some Spanish soldiers up to Fort St. Joseph to take over the fort. And they took it easily. They took it in one day, and they raised the Spanish flag, and then they left. So it was technically a Spanish fort for only one day. But it's a time when there was actually this tiny little battle connected to the American Revolution. Well, then what will happen? We know by 1783, the war will come to an end. And honestly, what has got to be one of the mysteries of world history? How did that general, with what was called a ragtag army, defeat the British Empire? You know, historians have written about that for years. When you think about it, our history is amazing. Anybody would have put money on the British, not us, but we didn't. You know, you gotta honor George Washington, his incredible leadership capabilities, and the desire for independence and freedom that was instilled in a colonist at that time. Well, now the map will change again, and that peak will become a new country, the United States, and stretch to the Mississippi. There were a few problems, however, had to be solved. Remember that these, out in this area, those folks had claimed parts of that. Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Virginia. They agreed they would give up their claims to the land. And so that would become, over time, where we are, will become the Northwest Territory. All right? Now, if that hadn't happened, where would we be sitting today? In Massachusetts, all right? We'd still be Massachusetts. But it was decided that, no, for the good of the country, we want this to be a new territory, and it's going to become 5 new states, which of course it did. There was one more problem. The British would not leave. George Washington made it clear, you lost, it's over, go home. But the British would not leave. They wouldn't leave Fort Detroit, they would not leave Fort Mackinac on the island. They just stayed there. And George Washington said, what am I going to do about this? Should I send soldiers out there? I've got so much to do right now. I'm trying to take these 13 little states who tend to be arguing a lot and create a new country. You know what? Let them be for a while. And it wouldn't be until, believe it or not, 1796 that the British flag would finally come down on Fort Detroit and Fort Mackinac. So technically the British will stay. Right? They'll just stay here. You got to admit, Mackinac Island, if you've been there, is a nice place. So maybe they just said, we kind of like it here. And you know, the Detroit River is kind of pretty, we're just going to stay. And it wasn't until Jay's Treaty they finally went home. But now what about the Anishinaabe? That's where I started. So that's where I need to end. What happened to them? Well, in 1795, a treaty will be signed, the Treaty of Greenville, and the Anishinaabe will give up that little purple area of land. But watch what happens in the next 46 years. There'll be treaty after treaty after treaty after treaty, and technically it'll all be gone. It'll just be one chunk over another, one chunk over another, piece after piece after piece after piece, until all that's left, oops, oh no, not yet. Imagine from essentially all of Michigan to 32 square miles. Now, you know, the treaties weren't willingly signed. It was under duress. It's a great story. But unfortunately, remember, I was only given 20 minutes, so I can't tell that story. But you did get an idea of what was happening before the Revolution, and you got a glimpse at during it and a little after it. And you did get forts and furs and a raid by the Spanish, just like I promised. And not only that, as a bonus, you got to see a whole bunch of maps. And it occurred to me that George Washington would be very happy that I did it that way. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carol. That was fantastic. most people don't, where they live. They don't really understand or know the history of where they live. And that was great. That was a great presentation, Carol. Thank you so much for being here today. All right, next up we have our business meeting. And to start that off, we have the presentation of the scholarship. That's what we do. The proceeds that we incur over here, that we get here, is going towards paying for the bills and the scholarship. And this year's scholarship winner is Claudia Klempp with 2 P's. Now, Claudia is a lifetime resident of Holly and 4th generation of her family to attend Holly schools. She's an avid athlete at swim, bowling, and tennis, and voted captain of all 3. Her GPA is 3.724. Yay. She's a member of the National Honor Society, the National Technical Honor Society, and Rho Kappa. How's that? Pretty good. Okay. She volunteers quite a bit in the community. You can see the Klempp family's always done that. And also at church. She's going to be attending Oakland Community College in the fall and pursue a degree for radiology technician. The subject of her winning, well-written paper is George Washington and the Revolution. Give a hand for Claudia, please.
I'm a little short. Okay. Born on February 22nd, 1732, was General George Washington. He grew up in Virginia, where he had a basic education. He did well in mathematics, which helped him later in his different careers. After his father passed when he was just 11, he had to step up and help on the family farm. He looked up to his older stepbrother, Lawrence Washington, after the passing of his father. Lawrence Washington helped George Washington get his first ever job as a surveyor. Lawrence then married Anne Fairfax, who helped George Washington learn and become more familiar with the colonial people. What George Washington experienced in his childhood helped shape who he would eventually become in his adult life. General George Washington served America in many ways through his life. George Washington was selected to be the commander of the Continental Army. He was chosen because of his leadership, which he continued to show throughout his life. George Washington's beliefs on the American Revolution helped him become a stronger leader as well. He believed in a new United States and would do everything in his power to obtain one. He was a general who fought hard, bringing the colonies to independence. George Washington was a resilient leader and led his army to attack General Cornwell's army in Yorktown. This significant decision made by Washington led to the British surrendering. Soon after Yorktown battle, the Revolutionary War with Britain ended, leading the United States to win the Revolutionary War. Today, he is known for his accomplishments over his years of service to this country. He is accepted as the father of his country for making the United States what it is today. Washington was infamous for laying the foundation of American democracy when he became the first ever president of the United States. George Washington also assisted in the making of the Declaration of Independence, which was an immense part of the United States to this day. Everything he accomplished in his lifetime during his childhood, and especially his time serving the American Revolutionary War, made George Washington a very well-known and resilient general. Thank you.
Thank you, Claudia, and good luck in your endeavors and going to college. And we appreciate you. The reason you won is because you're outstanding. The introduction of the 2026 officers. President, I'll be president next year. Vice President, Pastor Phil Martin. Secretary, Kay Thorsby. Treasurer, Patricia Walls. Vice President, oh, we already went through that. Oh, that's for 2025 officers. I'll be the president, Pastor Phil Martin, Vice President, Kay Thorsby, Secretary, and Treasurer Pat Walls. And we appreciate all of them for their hard work, because they've been doing this for years and keeping up this tradition, 129 years, and you all are part of this club, whether you know it or not, by being here today, and we thank you all for that. The advisory board is Richard Kinnaman, Chester Coop, Joe Mischler, and Janet Stack Miller. And that is the end of our presentations. Now we're going to sing Your Grand Old Flag, because we love our flag. The lyrics are on the back of your program. Get your singing voices ready.
Like, we need to approve the minutes of the treasurer's report.
Oh.
It's okay, it's just a little.
Want me to read the whole thing, or?
Usually Kay reads her minutes. Usually Kay reads her minutes from last year,
Okay.
and then we approve them, and then I read the treasurer's report. And
So I'm new at this, and I'm getting a little information here. Okay.
it's okay.
Kay Thorsby's she's our secretary, and she's going to be giving you a report for 2024.
Okay, first, I'm not 129 years old. I haven't done it that long. That was a good one, Mike. Last year's Secretary's report was February 15th, 2024. We had it here at First Baptist Church of Holly. The weather was the same as today, cold, snowy, and the temperature was about 35 degrees. President Janet Stack Miller welcomed us all. Michael Patterson presented the American flag from American Legion Post 149. Pastor Cliff Schroeder from Holly Methodist Church gave the invocation, and after was followed by the Pledge of Allegiance and the Star Spangled Banner, led by Mike Beauchamp. Our traditional meal was served, and of course the traditional dessert of cherry pie, which gets better every year, doesn't it, Janet? The coffee is brewed in Valley Alley Coffee Shop. We served about 110 attendees. After the luncheon, Janet thanked everyone who volunteers and cooks and serves our luncheon. Joe was introduced and gave a speech on the symbolism of the Purple Heart Medal. Gina LaCroix was our speaker from the DAR. She presented information about the Daughters of the American Revolution and shared history about George Washington. Secretary Kay Thorsby read the minutes from February 16th, 2023. Motion by Joe to approve the minutes, seconded by Pat Walls. Motion approved. Treasurer Pat Walls read the treasurer's report. Had a balance of $1,037.72. The scholarship fund was $586. A motion by Joe Mischler to approve the report. Motion seconded by Sue Less. Motion approved. The scholarship winner was unable to attend last year. Her name was Ann Thies. Janet Stack Miller, the president, read a summary of her essay. There was a moment of silence in memory of those who were club members that may have passed away last year. The benediction was given by Pastor Cliff Schroeder. Closing songs, Your Grand Old Flag, God Be With You, all sung in unison under the leadership of Mike Beauchamp. Thank you.
Thank you, Kay. I had a little bit of a faulty cord here, so it's but thank you, Kay, for all your work, your hard work.
I move to approve the secretary's report.
Second.
All in favor? Thank you. Now I would like to invite Pastor Phil up here for an invocation. I'm sorry?
Treasurer's report.
Oh, I'm sorry, treasurer's report. Sorry. We'll get there.
All right.
Did you want to?
It's okay, he's only auditioning for next year, so.
That's funny.
I thought so too. I should be a stand-up comedian actually, but no. All right. There was a copy of the treasurer's report on the back table, if anybody wanted to take a picture of it or look at it. General funds are $968.27, and the scholarship fund is $500, which we'll be giving out to our recipients. So we need to replenish the scholarship fund for next year. So everybody, there's a jar back there for some money. So, do I have a motion?
I move.
Moved by Joe Mishler,
I'll second.
second by Kay Thorsby. You want to say all in favor?
Okay, anything else? Anything else?
All in favor.
Oh, okay, all right. All in favor? Thank you. Motion passed. And now, Pastor Phil Martin, would you please give us an invocation?
Absolutely. Thank you all for being here today. Hey, so we're celebrating some history that is pretty old, but I want to leave you with some words that are about 4,000 years old. May the Lord bless you and keep you, and make his face to shine upon you and give you peace.
Amen. And now your singing voices, we're going to do It's a Grand Old Flag. Words are on the back of your program. Before Carol leaves, I'm going to ask her about that woolly mammoth they found down on Adams Road in 59. You're a grand old flag, you're a high-flying flag, and forever in peace may you wave. You're the emblem of the land I love, the home of the free and the brave. Every heart beats true for the red, white, and blue, where there's never a boast or brag. But should old acquaintance be forgot, keep your eye on the grand old flag. And to finish, we're going to sing God Be With You. If you'd all sing along with me. God be with you till we meet again. By his counsels guide uphold you, with his sheep securely fold you. God be with you till we meet again, till we meet at Jesus' feet. Till we meet. God be with you till we meet again. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. You're part of the Washington Club, the George Washington Club. And we'd like to thank all our dignitaries for showing up here today. We appreciate you all. Thank you so much. Have a good day.